Your savings account lost value today. Not because you spent anything. Not because the market crashed. It happened quietly while you were sleeping, while you were making coffee, while you were scrolling through news that told you everything was fine. And the worst part? The people who did it to you are not hiding. They are sitting in boardrooms in Beijing, in Geneva, in Riyadh. They are signing documents. They are moving gold, thousands of tons of it. And nobody on your television is talking about what that actually means for the number sitting in your bank account right now. My name is Roxy, and today, sweet, I am going to whisper something into your ear that the financial press has been too afraid, or too paid, to say out loud. Let's start with something that hit you personally, not theoretically, personally. In January 2020, the average American grocery bill for a family of 4 was $567 per month. In March 2026, that same basket cost $923. That is a 63% increase. Not because food got better, not because farmers got richer. Because the dollar, the thing your labor gets converted into every 2 weeks, quietly, steadily, became worth less. Your landlord raised rent. Your car insurance went up 34% since 2023. Your mortgage payment, if you were brave enough to buy in the last 3 years, is consuming 43% of your take-home pay. The average American, not someone poor, the average one. And you were told this was inflation, a temporary thing. Transitory, they called it. Remember that word? Transitory. Jerome Powell said it in 2021. Then again in early 2022. Goldman Sachs analysts wrote memos saying inflation would cool by mid-2022. It did not cool, it mutated. And now, in 2026, the mutation has a name. And that name is not inflation. That name is de-dollarization. Sweetheart, let me shatter something for you right now. Something you believed without even knowing you believed it. You were told the world runs on dollars because America is powerful. Because America has the best military, the biggest economy, the most innovation. And yes, those things are real. But they are not why the dollar rules the world. The dollar rules the world because of a deal. One specific deal. Signed in 1974. Between Henry Kissinger and the Saudi royal family. The agreement was elegant in its simplicity. Saudi Arabia would sell its oil only in US dollars. Every country on earth that needed oil, which was every country on earth, had to first buy dollars. That created permanent, structural, artificial global demand for American currency. It was not economics, it was geopolitical engineering, and it worked for 50 years. That deal, that single document, is what put the super in superpower. Not aircraft carriers, not Silicon Valley, not Hollywood. One agreement about oil and currency made in the desert half a century ago. And my darling, that document is burning. Slowly, page by page. And China is holding the match. Here is where most people change the channel. Because what comes next feels too big to be real. It feels like a conspiracy theory. But I want you to stay with me because I am not going to give you opinions. I am going to give you numbers, dates, names, actual transactions that happened in the real world. Because the real conspiracy, the one that actually affects your life, is not hidden in shadows. It is published in central bank reports, in IMF working papers, in statements from the People's Bank of China. It is hiding in plain sight, inside documents that nobody told you to read. So let's read them together. In 2000, China held approximately 395 tons of gold in its official reserves. That was a modest number. Respectable, but not alarming. By 2015, that number had grown to 1,262 tons. People noticed. Analysts wrote cautious reports. But the consensus on Wall Street was, this is diversification, normal central bank behavior, nothing to worry about. By 2022, China's official gold reserves crossed 2,000 tons. The word official is doing enormous work in that sentence, and I will come back to it. The IMF recorded the numbers. Bloomberg reported them. The story lasted one news cycle and then disappeared under celebrity gossip and political theater. And then the acceleration began. In 2023, China added 225 tons of gold in a single year. the fastest single-year accumulation in modern Chinese history. In 2024, they added another 190 tons. In 2025, as geopolitical pressure from U.S. tariffs reached levels not seen since the 1930s, China bought an additional 310 tons. And in early 2026, the People's Bank of China has already purchased 87 tons in the first quarter alone. The run rate suggests they will exceed 340 tons by year-end. Total official Chinese gold reserves as of today, somewhere above 4,300 tons. But here is the secret within the secret, my good one. The word official. China reports what it chooses to report. Academic estimates suggest China's actual gold holdings may be between 25,000 and 33,000 tons, including reserves held through state-owned commercial banks, sovereign wealth vehicles, and undisclosed strategic accounts. To put that in perspective, the United States claims to hold 8,133 tons at Fort Knox. An amount, by the way, that has not been independently audited since 1953, but that is a different whisper for a different day. Now let me give you the shape of the trap, baby, step by step, because this is where it gets elegant and terrifying. Step 1. Accumulate quietly. For 20 years, China bought gold when nobody was paying attention. They bought it through intermediaries, through Hong Kong, through Swiss refiners. They suppressed their own reporting. They were patient. The Chinese Communist Party operates on 5-year plans, sometimes on 50-year plans. While American politicians think about the next election cycle, Beijing thinks about the next dynasty. Step 2. Weaponize the alternative. In 2009, Zhou Xiaochuan, then governor of the People's Bank of China, published an essay calling for a new global reserve currency to replace the dollar. He called it a super sovereign reserve currency. At the time, commentators laughed. It was not posturing. It was a roadmap. Step 3. Build the architecture. Between 2014 and 2024, China built the infrastructure of an alternative financial system. The Cross-Border Interbank Payment System, CIPS, now processes transactions for 183 countries. It is a direct competitor to SWIFT. In 2025, CIPS transaction volume exceeded $15 trillion annually. That number was essentially zero in 2012. Step 4. Recruit the coalition. This is the part that should make your stomach drop, sweet, because China did not do this alone. In 2023, Saudi Arabia announced it would accept Chinese yuan as payment for oil. Not all oil, not yet, but the threshold had been crossed. The sacred covenant had been breached. Russia accelerated its own de-dollarization. By 2025, over 60% of Russia-China trade was settled in currencies other than the dollar. The ruble-yuan swap line expanded to $300 billion. Brazil signed bilateral trade agreements with China in local currencies. India began settling some oil imports in rupees. The UAE started accepting yuan, and then came the moment that the financial press almost entirely missed. In June 2025, at the BRICS summit in Kazan, Russia, the member nations formally adopted a framework for a BRICS trade settlement unit, backed at least partially by gold. The architecture is built. You are living inside the transition right now. Step 5. Let the dollar hollow itself out from within. This is perhaps the most diabolical part, my darling, and it requires almost no action from Beijing whatsoever, because Washington is doing it for them. The U.S. national debt in January 2026 crossed $37.4 trillion. The CBO projects it will reach $50 trillion by 2034. The interest payments alone will exceed $1.1 trillion in 2026. That is more than the entire U.S. defense budget of 2019. Scott Bessent said in 2026, "We are committed to fiscal discipline." He said this while presiding over a $2.1 trillion deficit. It is a chasm. The gap between what he said and what the numbers show is not a rounding error. It is a chasm. And Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock controlling $11.5 trillion in assets, wrote in his 2025 annual letter to investors, "For the first time in my career, I am hearing from sovereign wealth funds and central banks who are genuinely asking whether U.S. Treasuries remain the default risk-free asset. That question, being asked openly, is itself a seismic event. When the man who manages $11.5 trillion says something like that quietly, you should listen very carefully. Now, sweet, I want to talk about the machine that was supposed to keep all of this from happening. The beautiful, terrifying, enormously expensive machine, the aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford, launched in 2017, $13.3 billion for the hull alone. It is genuinely awe-inspiring to look at. It fills you with a sense of power and permanence. And in the classified sections of the 2025 Pentagon assessment, it was acknowledged that a single DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missile is specifically designed to sink a carrier group. The math is not complicated. A $13 billion carrier versus an $11 million missile. And China has hundreds of them. These are not secret weapons. They are publicly displayed at military parades. Their existence is not disputed. The point is not that America is weak. The point is that the military argument for dollar dominance, the idea that the dollar is backed by aircraft carriers, has a mathematical ceiling that the Pentagon itself recognizes in its own documents. The world's governments recognize it too, and they are making decisions based on that recognition, right now, in 2026. The point is not that America is weak. The point is that the military argument for dollar dominance, the idea that the dollar is backed by aircraft carriers, has a mathematical ceiling that the Pentagon itself recognizes in its own documents. The world's governments recognize it too, and they are making decisions based on that recognition, right now, in 2026.
Let me bring in a historical whisper here, baby, because I think it will help you feel the shape of what is happening. In 1853, a fleet of American warships, the Black Ships the Japanese called them, sailed into Edo Bay and forced Japan to open its borders to foreign trade. Japan had been closed for over 2 centuries. Suddenly, it was open. The Americans wanted markets. They wanted access. They used naval power to get it. What happened next is one of the greatest strategic transformations in human history. The Japanese did not resist and die. They did not simply comply and shrink. They studied. They adapted. The Meiji Restoration of 1868 was Japan's response, a deliberate, disciplined, top-down transformation of an entire civilization to compete with the West on Western terms, but faster and with a ferocity that the West did not anticipate. By 1905, Japan defeated Russia, a European great power, in open naval warfare. The West was stunned. How did this happen? It happened because Japan studied the threat, accepted the reality of its position, and adapted with absolute discipline over 5 decades. China watched, China remembered, and China, beginning in roughly 1978 with Deng Xiaoping's reforms, began its own version of the Meiji Restoration. Deng's famous phrase was, "Hide your strength, bide your time." For 40 years, China hid. It manufactured the world's goods. It accumulated reserves. It studied Western financial architecture. It sent its students to MIT and Harvard and Wharton to learn how the system worked from the inside. And now, my darling, the biding time is over. The strength is no longer hidden. The gold is stacked. The payment systems are built. The coalitions are signed. The alternative architecture is live. This is not the beginning of a threat. This is the end of the preparation phase. Now I need to tell you something that most financial commentators refuse to say because it sounds too final, too irreversible. But you deserve the truth, sweet, so here it is. The mathematical trap has closed. Here is why. For the dollar to maintain its reserve currency status, the world needs to trust that US treasuries are a safe, stable, appreciating store of value. That trust requires 2 things: low and manageable debt levels and geopolitical stability that makes the United States an indispensable anchor. The debt is $37.4 trillion and growing at roughly $1 trillion every 100 days. That is not my number. That is the US debt clock, updated in real time, publicly available to anyone with internet access. The geopolitical stability argument has frayed, not collapsed, frayed. The Afghanistan withdrawal in 2021, the inability to resolve the Ukraine conflict decisively, the growing perception among global South nations that American foreign policy serves American interests rather than global stability. These things accumulate. They change calculations in finance ministries from Jakarta to Nairobi to Riyadh. And here is the brutal mathematics of reserve currency transition. When a country holds US treasuries as reserves and begins to doubt their long-term value, it starts selling them. Slowly at first, just a small percentage. Diversification, they call it. But as more countries do it, treasury prices fall. When treasury prices fall, yields rise. When yields rise, the cost of servicing America's $37.4 trillion debt increases. When debt service costs increase, the deficit grows larger. When the deficit grows larger, more treasuries must be issued. When more treasuries are issued into a market of declining demand, yields rise further. This is not a theory, this is arithmetic. It is the same arithmetic that destroyed the British pound's reserve currency status between 1914 and 1956. It is the same arithmetic that ended the era of French franc dominance in the 19th century. Every reserve currency in history has eventually been replaced, 100% of them. The dollar is not exempt from history. The only question is the timing and the speed. And the speed, my good one, is now being determined in Beijing, not Washington. Goldman Sachs published a research note in November 2025, internal, leaked to the Financial Times, that contained a phrase I want you to hear. They wrote, "We model a scenario in which the dollar's share of global reserves falls from its current 58% to approximately 40% by 2035. Under this scenario, the adjustment in US interest rates required to attract sufficient foreign capital would constitute a structural shock to American living standards without modern precedent." A structural shock to American living standards without modern precedent. That is Goldman Sachs, not a blogger, not a doomsday channel. The most prestigious investment bank in the world, writing internally for their highest net worth clients about a scenario they consider real enough to model. And what does a structural shock to American living standards mean in practice? Let me translate it from banker language into your language. It means your mortgage rate does not go to 7%, it goes to 11%. It means the grocery bill that is already $923 a month goes to $1,400. It means the government, unable to borrow cheaply, cuts programs. Social Security cost of living adjustments get deferred, Medicaid reimbursement rates drop, infrastructure spending collapses. It means the dollar in your pocket buys noticeably, measurably, permanently less. Not a crisis, not a crash. Something potentially more insidious, a slow, grinding compression of purchasing power that looks on any individual Tuesday like just another hard month, but adds up over 5 years to a fundamentally different life. So what does China actually want? And who is the third player, the one in the shadows, the one filling bags with gold while everyone stares at the US-China standoff? The answer, sweetheart, is going to surprise you. Everyone expects me to say Russia, or India, or perhaps the EU. The answer is the Gulf states, specifically the UAE and Saudi Arabia operating in coordinated concert. Here is what has happened quietly since 2022. The Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, ADIA, one of the largest sovereign wealth funds on earth, managing somewhere between $700 billion and $1 trillion in assets, has been systematically increasing its gold allocation from approximately 2% to an estimated 7 to 9% of total portfolio. In dollar terms, that is a shift of $50 to $70 billion out of dollar-denominated assets and into physical gold. The Saudi Public Investment Fund, MBS's vehicle for post-oil economic transformation, made a series of investments in 2024 and 2025 that, when mapped together, reveal a deliberate hedging strategy against dollar depreciation. Mining stocks, gold ETFs, direct commodity positions. And then there is the deal that was made in March 2025 in Riyadh that the Western press reported for exactly 1 day before moving on. Saudi Arabia agreed to a currency swap line with China worth 50 billion yen and quietly extended the oil for yuan settlement program that had been piloted in 2023. The country that signed the original petrodollar agreement is now building the infrastructure of its exit from that agreement. Kissinger's deal is not burning at the edges, it is burning at the foundation. And the Gulf states are not choosing sides, they are choosing both sides simultaneously. American security guarantees and Chinese financial architecture, they are hedging. And the fact that they feel the need to hedge tells you everything about where they think this is going. Now, my darling, let me talk about you, specifically. Because everything I have told you lives in the realm of geopolitics and macroeconomics until it arrives in your mailbox. And it is arriving. The mechanism by which all of this reaches you is the bond market, specifically what happens to US Treasury yields. When foreign central banks reduce their treasury holdings, and in 2025, net foreign holdings of US Treasuries fell for the third consecutive year, declining by $340 billion, the Federal Reserve faces a choice. Let yields rise, which makes your mortgage, your car loan, your credit card debt more expensive. Or buy the treasuries itself, which creates new dollars, which dilutes the value of every dollar you already hold. There is no third option. The Fed has been attempting a combination of both, which is why you feel squeezed from two directions simultaneously. High interest rates crushing your borrowing costs and persistent inflation eroding your purchasing power. This is not bad luck. This is the mathematical consequence of the system China is dismantling. You are living inside the unwinding. Every month, every grocery run, every insurance renewal. The Incrementum AG 2025 in Gold We Trust report, one of the most respected annual gold market analyses in the world, authored by Ronald Stoffel and Mark Valek, stated directly, the global monetary order is in transition. Gold is not rising. The dollar is falling. The distinction matters enormously for how investors and indeed ordinary savers should position themselves. The dollar is falling. Not gold is rising. The dollar is falling. Now, I am not going to tell you exactly what to do with your money because that is not what this channel is, sweet. But I am going to tell you what the smartest, most connected players in the world are doing, and you can draw your own conclusions. Central banks globally, not China, not Russia, but all central banks collectively purchased 1,037 tons of gold in 2023, then 1,045 tons in 2024. Then 1,100 tons in the first 3 quarters of 2025 before final figures were compiled. 3 consecutive record years of central bank gold buying. These are not conspiracy theorists. These are the institutions that manage the financial reserves of sovereign nations: Poland, Singapore, Turkey, Czech Republic, India. All buying gold at rates not seen since the end of the Bretton Woods gold standard in 1971. They are buying because they are reading the same arithmetic you just read, and they are making the institutional equivalent of a decision that millions of individual people have not yet made, because nobody translated the banker language into plain words until now. JP Morgan Chase, in their 2026 Global Markets Outlook published in January, wrote, "We see gold as the most compelling macro hedge for the next 3 to 5 year period. The combination of geopolitical fragmentation, fiscal deterioration in major advanced economies, and accelerating central bank diversification creates a structural demand floor that is qualitatively different from previous gold bull markets." Structural demand floor from JP Morgan, the largest bank in the United States. Let me give you the Meiji parallel one more time, because I wanted to land, baby, before we reach the end. Japan in 1853 was not stupid. It was not weak in the ways that matter most: culture, discipline, ambition. It was simply operating on an outdated model. The world had changed, and Japan had not yet absorbed the change. The black ships were the moment of rupture, the moment when pretending the world had not changed became impossible. We are living in our black ships moment, not as dramatically, not with warships in the harbor, but equally rupturing. The world's monetary architecture is changing. The petrodollar system, the invisible infrastructure that made American purchasing power possible for 50 years, is in managed decline. The institutions that know this are already repositioning. The countries that know this are already repositioning. And the question, the one that determines whether you are Japan in 1868 or Japan in 1853, is whether you absorb this reality and adapt, or whether you wait for someone on television to tell you it is safe to acknowledge. Nobody is coming on television to tell you that, because the television is paid for by the system that is changing. I want to leave you with a number. The number is 1971. In August 1971, President Nixon ended the convertibility of the dollar to gold. The Bretton Woods system, the post-World War II architecture in which the dollar was anchored to gold at $35 per ounce, collapsed overnight. Nixon called it a temporary suspension. It was never reversed. That was the moment the dollar became a pure fiat currency, backed not by gold, not by a fixed commodity, but by trust. By the full faith and credit of the United States government, by the belief that the number in your bank account represented something real. For 55 years, that belief held. It held because American economic and military dominance made alternatives unthinkable. Because the petrodollar system created artificial structural demand. Because the architecture of global finance was designed, institution by institution, to funnel the world's savings through New York. But trust, my darling, is not a physical thing. It does not decay on a predictable schedule. It holds and holds and holds. And then, suddenly, it does not. And the people who know exactly when the transition happens are not posting about it on social media. They are buying gold in Switzerland. They are building payment systems in Shanghai. They are signing currency swap agreements in Riyadh. They are getting very, very quiet. And in geopolitics, when the people who know something get very quiet, that is when you should start paying the closest attention of your life. So here is what I want you to sit with tonight, sweet. Not a solution, just a question. If the petrodollar agreement, the one document that has underwritten American purchasing power since 1974, is structurally unwinding, and if the gold that was supposed to backstop a new monetary order has been quietly accumulated by the country that is most motivated to replace US dominance, and if the central banks of Singapore and Poland and India and Saudi Arabia are all independently making the same bet at the same time, what does that tell you about what the people who actually run the financial system believe is coming? And if they believe it, if the largest sovereign wealth funds, the most prestigious investment banks, the central banks of nations that have no ideological reason to be anti-American, are all quietly, professionally, systematically positioning for a world where the dollar is less central, then what are you waiting for? Not a question about gold, not a question about investments, a deeper question. What information would you need to see? What number, what event, what headline, before you decided that the system you were born into is actually changing? And by the time that information is obvious enough to appear on your television, will it still be early enough to matter? Write that answer in the comments below. I read every single one. Because the most dangerous thing in a geopolitical shift is not being on the wrong side. It is not knowing a shift is happening at all. And you, my good one, now you know.